For almost 20 years, football has been chasing one man's shadow, and quietly, it has failed every single time. Every time a kid with a magic left foot appears, the hype machine roars. Neymar got crowned first. Then Dybala was the new Messi. Then Ødegaard. And right now, the whole internet is saying the exact same thing about Lamine Yamal. But here's the thing, nobody wants to admit not one of them ever became Messi. And it probably isn't their fault. Because the mission was doomed before it started. How do you even build a player like this? A guy who buries 800 goals and still passes like a playmaker who never shoots. Good luck with that. How do you build one player who's the 10, the striker, the playmaker, and the guy who ends games? 8 Ballon d'Or, a World Cup, a Copa America, and still rewriting the record books at 39. Build me that. You can't. Nobody can. And here's the twist. Messi's real problem was never that he was too good. It's that he was too unrepeatable. Football has always had guys who outscored everyone in the room. It's had players who could dribble through walls. It's had pure athletic freaks of nature. But Messi is a different species. He's all of it, stuffed into one impossibly small body. And that's the whole reason. The world keeps hunting for a second one, and keeps coming home empty-handed. Sure, someday, somebody might win more trophies than Messi. Someday, somebody might score even more goals than Messi did. But none of that will make them Messi. Because the truth football is finally waking up to is brutally simple. We are never seeing a second Messi, and it has nothing to do with talent. Players like him aren't born to be repeated. If there's one thing football loves as much as talent, it's slapping a label on it. The second, a young player flashes silky feet, a sweet left foot, or one flash of magic out of nothing, the nickname gets stamped on him almost instantly. The new Messi. Sounds like a gift, right? It's actually the heaviest curse you can hand a teenager, because from that second on, nobody sees him as himself anymore. He's measured against Lionel Messi, and that's a fight you simply cannot win. Take Neymar, the clearest case of all. At Santos, the entire planet saw him as the chosen heir. The pace, the trickery, the swagger, the ability to pull genius out of thin air. Neymar had every bit of it. He moved to Barcelona, played beside Messi, studied Messi up close. For years, people swore this was as close as anyone would ever get. But in the end, Neymar stayed Neymar, a phenomenal player, a Brazilian icon, but never Messi. Then came Dybala, a left foot soaked in pure magic, an Argentine, a style that dragged your memory straight back to peak Barcelona Messi. From day one at Juventus, the papers were calling him the heir. And Dybala didn't become Messi either. Not for a lack of talent, but because nobody alive can copy what Messi does. Then Ødegaard. Then João Félix. Then Phil Foden. A whole assembly line of prodigies. Every one of them had a season where the media chained his name to Messi's. But every time, the years proved the same brutal point. They became wonderful players. They just never became Messi. And now it's Lamine Yamal's turn, 17, absurdly gifted, forged at La Masia, hugging the right touchline, left foot loaded, pulling off things that make Camp Nou flash straight back to Messi. And here we go again. The comparisons return. The hope returns. But history keeps trying to teach us the same lesson, and we keep refusing to listen. Maybe these kids aren't the problem at all. Maybe Messi was never a fair measuring stick to begin with. Because zoom out across his entire career, and you spot something wild. Messi isn't great at one thing, he's great at all of them. A player who dribbles like Messi? Rare. A player who scores like Messi? Rare. One who creates like Messi? Also rare. But a player who does all of it at once, for almost 20 years straight. That has never existed. And that's exactly why the world keeps whiffing on the search for an heir. They're trying to photocopy something that was never meant to be copied. Messi isn't a blueprint, he's a glitch. A glitch so enormous football has spent 2 decades trying to reverse engineer him and still hasn't cracked the code. And maybe it never will. So here's the real question. Why has football pumped out brilliant players for 2 straight decades and still produced 0 second Messis? Because we've been looking at him wrong this whole time. Say Messi, and most people picture the dribbles, the goals, the highlight reel magic. But that's just the easy part to see. What truly makes Messi hides in the parts almost nobody notices. So picture this. If a player had Neymar's technique, we'd call him a genius. If a player finished like Ronaldo, we'd call him a killer. If a player created like De Bruyne, we'd call him a maestro. If a player ran the tempo like Xavi or Iniesta, we'd call him the brain of the team. Messi does all of those jobs inside one body. That's what makes him nearly impossible to clone. For most of football history, the legends each had one defining trait. Pelé was completeness itself. Maradona was raw, untamed genius wearing a number 10. Ronaldo Nazario was the most terrifying goal machine of his era. Zidane was the artist who showed up on the biggest nights. Cristiano was hunger and output bottled and perfected. But Messi is a blend of all of them. He's the scorer and the creator and the architect and the spark and the finisher. Almost nobody in history has carried that many jobs on one pair of shoulders. And carrying them for nearly 20 years, that's the real miracle. Because talent shows up all the time, consistency almost never does. Some players peak for 3 years, some peak for 5. A rare few stretch it to 10. Messi? He's lived at the summit so long, we forgot how impossible that actually is. From a tiny kid in Barcelona, to the best on earth, to a World Cup champion, to the greatest scorer, the tournament has ever known, all of it across a span so long, that whole generations rose and vanished while he just stayed. That's something no academy can train, no coach can build, no playbook can copy. Because in the end, the thing that truly makes Messi isn't his feet, it's his mind. There are moments in a match where he seems to, literally, see the future. He knows where the gap will open, how his teammates will move, when to detonate, when to wait, and he usually knows it a full beat before everyone else on the field. That's why defenders say the scariest part of marking Messi isn't his speed or skill. It's that you never, ever know what's coming next. He doesn't follow the game's logic. He writes his own rules. And this is where the search for a second Messi quietly dies. Because you can train a player to dribble better. You can train him stronger. You can train him faster. But tell me, how do you train instinct? How do you coach a mind reading 3 moves ahead? How do you build a brain that sees football in a completely different dimension than everyone else? Nobody knows. Probably not even Messi. It's something you're born with, the very thing that makes him the exception. And that's why, after all the hyped up names, after every kid labeled the new one, the world still hasn't found a real successor. Not because they're not good enough, but because Messi was never something you could copy. Here's a fun, almost absurd truth even. If you showed a kid his entire career, every second of it, you still couldn't teach them to be Messi. Sounds insane, right? Because football is the ultimate sport of learning. Players learn technique, learn tactics, learn how to move, to finish, to defend. All of it gets passed down, generation to generation. But Messi breaks the rule, because so much of what makes him simply can't be taught. You can learn to strike it like him, dribble like him, even scan the pitch like him, but you'll almost never learn to think like him. And that's where the gap splits wide open. For years, millions of kids around the world have tried to be him. They wore the 10, dribbled left-footed, devoured every highlight, copied every move frame by frame, and every single one of them learned the same lesson. Imitating Messi is the easy part. Becoming Messi is impossible, because he's not the product of one skill. He's the product of dozens of rare things colliding at once. A freak talent, a one-off brain, a perfect place to grow up, an academy like La Masia, a philosophy like Barcelona's, a generation of teammates like Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets, a football-obsessed nation like Argentina, and above all else, a will that point-blank refuses to ever stop. Just imagine it. If Messi had been born somewhere else, if Barcelona had never found him, if he'd never gotten that treatment as a boy, never met the people who shaped his career, would football history look anything like it does today? Nobody knows. And that's what makes Messi truly unrepeatable, because he isn't the output of a formula. He's hundreds of rare variables colliding once. And that's why even the most gifted teenagers on the planet right now still can't become him. not for a lack of talent, but because they're chasing something that can't be chased. And maybe that's the single greatest mistake of modern football. We're forever hunting the heir, forever hunting the sequel, forever desperate to crown the next one. But we're chasing the wrong dream entirely, because football doesn't need a new Messi. It needs players who are fully themselves. Yamal doesn't need to be Messi. Mbappe doesn't need to be Messi. Haaland doesn't need to be Messi. They need to be the best version of themselves, exactly what Messi did his whole career. Because if you look back through history, the greatest legends were never copies of anyone. Pelé was nobody's copy. Maradona was nobody's copy. Cruyff was nobody's copy. Zidane was nobody's copy. And neither, not for 1 second, is Messi. He arrived once, rewired the entire sport, and set a bar so high, the world has spent 2 decades straining to reach it and failing every single time. And maybe that's the loudest proof of greatness there is. Not the goals, not the trophies, but the fact that even when the whole world copies you, it still can't manufacture even one more. And that's exactly why Messi isn't just a legend. He's a phenomenon, the kind of thing football may never witness again. Maybe, after everything we've watched, it's time to make peace with one truth. Someday, someone will score more goals than Messi. Someday, someone will lift more trophies than Messi. And someday, there may even be a player with numbers more staggering than anything Lionel Messi ever posted. That's just how sport works. Records exist to be broken. New generations always come. Old ceilings always shatter. And football, of course, is no exception. But here's what changes everything. Being better than Messi will never make you a second Messi. Because what made him special was never the numbers in the first place. Not the goals, not the trophies, not the Ballon d'Or. If stats were all that mattered, sport could always manufacture someone to top the ones before. But Messi was never just stats. He's emotion, he's memory. He's a slice of the childhood of millions of people across the world. Some grew up on those mazy runs at Barcelona. Some came of age through the heartbreak with Argentina. Some of us straight up wept when he finally lifted that World Cup in Qatar. And now they're still watching him play at 39. This stopped being a football story a long time ago. It's a story about time, about endurance, about staying on top so long it borders on the unbelievable. Because think about it, across Messi's career, how many times has the whole football world reinvented itself? Tactics changed. Generations changed. Superstars came and went. Entire dynasties changed. And Messi just kept on existing. From Ronaldinho to Neymar, from Kaká to Mbappe, from Xavi to Pedri, from a scrawny kid at La Masia to a World Cup champion and the greatest World Cup scorer ever. That's a road almost impossible to walk twice. And maybe that's why the world will keep failing to find a new Messi. Because Messi isn't a position on a pitch, not a player type, not a list of skills. Messi is a phenomenon, the kind that appears just once in several generations. Maybe Lamine Yamal becomes a legend in his own right. Maybe Mbappe builds a monumental legacy. Maybe some kid we haven't even heard of yet leaves the whole world speechless, but they'll be themselves, not Messi. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing about this sport. We don't need a second Messi, because we already had the first. And honestly, that was always more than enough. One day, Lionel Messi will retire. The roar will fade. The matches will end. The goals will dissolve into grainy old footage. But the legacy he leaves will outlive every bit of it. Not because of how many goals, not because of how many trophies, but because he made millions of us believe we were watching something sacred, something that would never come again. And maybe that right there is the answer football has been chasing for almost 20 years. Who's the next Messi? The honest answer is probably nobody, because Lionel Messi was never the first of his kind. He was the only one.